I am Mark Stewart. This is video number 3 of the DVD collection standing for Don't Vote Democrat. And I am a Democrat. I am not running as a Democrat, and any elected Democrat still on the ballot, with a few exceptions, should get a no vote this November. Civil rights is reason 3. And Democrats' ostensible support for African Americans in the 80s and the 90s was a reason many of us actually aligned ourselves with the Democrats. In the last 2 decades, that hasn't existed, because when it comes time to policy and not just words, Democrat officials have been horrible for African Americans. I'll start with number 1. Maybe the most basic right to life. And yet it was Democrat officials who 2 and even 1 year ago were saying, defund the police. That is the single stupidest idea in Western civilization, because civilization is founded on protecting one another against perils. And yes, do they expect volunteers instead of paid police to defend against drug cartels, to stop armed robberies, to go up against thugs committing domestic violence? Or maybe they just wouldn't have this anyway, and there should be no protection for other people. Oh, except themselves, because the elites, mostly white liberals, they do have good security and tend to live in very good neighborhoods. Ask Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Michael Bloomberg to dispense with their armed guards. If Michael Bloomberg publicly said, I am no longer having armed security around me, he will be kidnapped within 24 hours. It's ridiculous. And who does it hurt the most? African Americans, who don't have as much wealth as the elites yet, so have a hard time paying for personal security and shouldn't have to. African Americans who are more plagued by robberies in neighborhoods that are not policed well. African American women who suffer domestic violence, especially when there's a lack of police presence. Just ask any young woman in an inner city who's African American, are you grateful that there is some police presence for you? Okay, it's going to be like 95%. More elite silliness. It applies to schools, where the Democrat officials don't want choice. They don't believe in standards, and of late, they allow the teaching of white people want to submerge you, and letting African American kids hear that over and over and over again. Oh, and worse, that whites are all powerful and that the system backs them up because the system is inherently racist. Well, it doesn't take much more of that for 5 or 6 years to feel, well, there is a ceiling. And how can I escape that when all my teachers and colleagues are telling me this bad stuff about my prospects for success? No wonder a higher percentage of African American kids will drop out of school seeing more opportunity on streets than in school, that even if you succeed, you're not going to get very far. Oh, and if they do stay in school, the Democrats say you should be taught by less competent teachers if they share the same skin color as you. So, in the name of this forced diversity, very competent, very passionate, exceptionally well-trained white teachers are dismissed and leave kids of color subject to less good teachers. If you want to get better teachers, Democrats know this. They don't want to talk about it. They know that choice in schools is an instantly better solution. It's instantly better for kids and families, and even for teachers themselves, who will gravitate to better schools, will help make better schools. They'll be more empowered because they'll be more administratively capable than in the rigid school systems that today's teachers' unions define. Oh, the school ridiculousness. Who is it that preaches public schooling in inner cities is so good, yet send their own kids to private schools? That would be almost every elected senior Democrat in Washington. Okay, the only exception that I can remember, Jimmy Carter sent his daughter Amy to DC's not-so-good public schools, and he did it for show, because as soon as he was out of office and back in Georgia, she was enrolled in the elite Woodward Academy. Illegal immigration, another sellout by elected Democrats, because when the Biden administration buses Guatemalans and Haitians to new communities, they compete for many jobs, and they certainly take places in school seats and hospitals that might be more needed by African Americans. And even if they're not more needed, African Americans taking care of themselves largely, it's just not right to have a displacement like that when you're displacing needed services from Americans. Democrats don't care because, and this is the worst motive, they get votes from these soon-to-be citizens that they've let in. So at the altar of vote getting, they sell out African Americans. Social Security, long-standing issue. It hurts blacks clearly more than whites. It's a system that should be altered or abolished. Democrats know this. They don't do it. George Bush, Republican, tried pretty hard to dramatically change the system. He got totally stymied. Some by his own party too, but lockstep, no Democrats would do this. So in the process, African Americans who pay into Social Security longer on the whole, live shorter lifetimes, dramatically shorter if you look at the post-65 life expectancy for an African American male. It's about 3 years. For whites, it's about 10.5 years. And therefore, they're getting ripped off. Every year, 15.8% of African Americans' income is confiscated on the possible promise that you'll see it for a couple more years after you die. It's a system that should be abolished. Democrats don't do a thing for it. Oh, but they do of late loan forgiveness. So if you have gone to college and now are struggling to have a really good paying job, elite Democrats would like to just wipe out the loan. Well, meaning somebody else will pay for it, and that's working Americans, often black working Americans who didn't choose college. Or, as I see it, who, when they do go to college, rarely take out big loans and almost always have good jobs at the other end. African Americans who do choose college tend to not be in huge debt for long. They tend to choose practical majors. They tend to not get themselves in deep debt in the first place. Unlike, well, the kids of typically white elites who major in Bulgarian poetry, art therapy, lesbian dance studies, and yeah, find themselves without really good remuneration compared to the black kid who's majoring in computer science. Loan forgiveness is a total race division, okay? I'm not saying it's a race-based policy, but for those who look at discrepant effects, like many Democrats do, this is one of the biggest discrepancies against African Americans brought to you by, yes, your elected elite Democrats. Finally, because it'll probably come up again, coronavirus measures, which dramatically hurt African Americans far more than every other race. Visitation mandates in hospitals. Well, who has more or higher percentage anyway of elderly relatives in hospitals? Blacks or whites? Whites put them in more often. Senior living places. Blacks who have a harder time affording that can't do that. And so visitations in time of most dire need, gone thanks to government mandate. Oh, churches, attendance, gone thanks to government mandate. You look at Hartford's devout churches now, it's about a third of what it was 2 years ago thanks to unnecessary mandates foisted on us. The governors, mostly Democrat, closed small businesses. Who starts more small businesses percentage-wise? African Americans compared to any other race. They're being hurt. And the civil rights aspect is out. Okay? The Democrats, which maybe 40 years ago might have said, we are doing more. Can't say it now. Please do not vote Democrat, especially if you care for extending the civil rights of African Americans. Black power in 2022 should mean rising up against Democrats who occupy Congress and many state legislatures. That will improve people's lives. I'm Mark Stewart.